Yes, hello to you all out there in YouTube land. Welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV, the home of old school vintage dirt bikes. And as you know, my channel is now completely ad free. And if you're a regular visitor to my CDB TV channel, you'll notice that there hasn't been advertising on my channel for quite some time. And just lately I've been browsing through YouTube, and it's quite surprising how very few channels don't have video advertising. So CDB TV is one of those very unique platforms that you don't have to sit and watch a couple of minutes of advertising before each video. You just have to sit there and listen to me rambling on for about 5 minutes. But getting down to our next feature. Now, we were going to be featuring a 1981 CR250 Honda, but we're going to put that back a couple of months, and we'll do that feature later in the year. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some of the nice bikes that I've come across during the last 4 or 5 years of the Westmorland Classic Scramble. So that's exactly what we're going to do now. So let's not chat any longer, and let's get straight into the video. Okay, so let's begin our walk around the Westmorland Motor Club's Scrambles Paddock with a quick look around Lee Davis's quite nice and I suppose quite rare Hagon Yamaha. And these clips here were all filmed at Westmorland's Golden Jubilee in 2021. But it's another one of those Alf Hagon made fully aluminium monocoque chassis with, of course, the frame, swing arm, side number plates, and not forgetting, of course, that fuel tank that at first glance looks like it's bolted onto the chassis, but is actually integrated as part of the frame itself. A quite ingenious piece of alloy engineering by the guys at Hagon. But anyhow, the story and the history of the great Alf Hagon is quite well documented, and it's just far too long to tell in this very short clip. But essentially, Alf Hagon was a former speedway and grass track rider who later went on to build speedway and grass track chassis, and it was sometime later, I think around 1985, that he purchased the old Girling suspension operation and all of its tools and stock, although of course he couldn't at that time buy the actual Girling name, so he simply called his brand new suspension company Hagon. But as I said, the story of Alf and his past exploits are certainly worth having a look at. But certainly the engineering involved in making this monocoque chassis is quite amazing, from that square box section front down tube to those handcrafted alloy side plates and some of the other parts like that airbox that were all part of the frame's internal structure. And although it may not look it, this monocoque one-piece frame was super strong and, as you'd expect, super light. But even some of the other parts, like this fuel tank that, if you weren't familiar with these Hagon chassis, you could see that it looks like it's just bolted onto the frame in the conventional fashion, although this part, again, as I said, is integral to the chassis monocoque design. It's just because it's painted yellow and slightly different from the unpainted alloy structure that it looks like it's a separate part. But then again, it's all part and parcel of the ingenious design of these alloy Hagon chassis. And with regards to power plant, these Hagons were normally powered by a TT500 4-stroke Yamaha engine, which more than likely here on Lee's bike has had a big bore kit fitted with maybe a high lift cam and probably bigger valves as well. And you can see that the barrel and the head have also been lightened with some of those cooling fins removed and some of the others drilled out just to remove as much unnecessary alloy as possible to reduce the weight. Although, as you can imagine, there weren't actually many of these alloyed framed Hagon Yamahas made, and I think the first few that Hagon produced were built for the legendary Vic Eastwood to race, and they were all powered by these TT500 Yamaha thumper motors, a tried and tested 4-stroke engine that even in its standard trim was reasonably powerful and of course super reliable. Although there was one other Hagon bike that was built for Vic Eastwood, and it was this one here, this time powered by an engine that was based on the Suzuki SB370 4-stroke motor, but this engine here is currently bored out to 450cc and is the only one of its kind, and actually was ridden by the great man Vic Eastwood. So you're certainly looking at a true piece of British scrambling history here, and this bike still has all of its original parts from back in the day. But I've already done a full feature on this bike on my channel, so if you've got the time, then try and check it out. But I have come across quite a few examples of these Hagons down the years, and most, it has to be said, are usually locked up safe and sound in private collections because of their pedigree and their rarity, and you almost never ever see them in the great outdoors taking part in vintage scrambles. So this is another very rare treat to see one out and about on the racetrack. So a big well done to Lee for showing her off. And I do remember seeing this bike in action on the track in 2021, and it was an awesome sight to see one again thundering around the Westmorland racetrack. But anyhow, that's our first featured bike there. That's Lee Davis's superb Hagon Vic Eastwood Yamaha. Anyway, this was another old timer that I spotted at the Bill Brown Scramble at Westmorland in 2025, and this is John Britton's 1959 Norbsa 500, which, as its title suggests, is a combination of a BSA B31 chassis and a vintage single-cylinder long-stroking Norton engine. Another cracking old classic, and quite typical of the kind of combinations of different chassis and engine hybrids that you would have seen in those old scramble races of the 1950s and 60s, when riders did experiment with different combinations of frame and engine just to try and come up with the best scenario that would suit their own individual requirements for racing. But moving on to the engine that's inside our BSA frame, which at the time of filming I never actually got the full SB from the bike's owner, and I'm certainly not the guy to speak to if you want to know more about these antique Norton singles. But after a little bit of research, I'm quietly confident that this is an ES2 500 motor that powered some of the Norton road bikes of 1959, and I think that at one time this engine was also used to power some road racing bikes of that period as well. But furthermore, more than likely, in 1959, this engine would also be sitting inside one of those iconic Rex McCandless built featherbed frames when it was used on the Norton road bike. And as far as I can make out, it was a pre-unit engine with the gearbox separate from the engine, but just joined by way of a simple primary chain. And then the motor itself was a side valve unit with a matchless gearbox as its transmission. And here at the front end of our Norbsa is probably a pair of BSA forks, which are more than likely in keeping with the age and the period of that BSA chassis. And also here at the front we've got an old school drum and shoe type brakes with an alloy wheel on both the front and at the rear, which again on the road bike in 1959 would more than likely have been just a simple steel wheel with chrome plating. So moving on to the rear wheel, where we've got BSA's QD hub, or quick detach to give it its proper name, but basically this QD hub lets you remove the rear wheel while leaving the chain and the brake etc. all intact, because that inner part of the hub there was on splines, so once you removed that centre spindle you could just simply pull the wheel out of the swing arm. A quite brilliant and simple solution when you come to think of it. And of course also for 1959 it was good old fashioned alloy that was used on these off-road scramblers, and parts like this fuel tank and things like the front and rear mudguards are all made good use of aluminium, because these of course were the days before plastic, and in my opinion aluminium use for tanks and mudguards looks a lot better than plastic anyhow. But certainly this is another quite good example of one of those old school scramblers from the late 1950s. That's John Britton's 1959 Norbsa from the Westmorland Scramble in 2025. Although we're heading back to 2021 this time to take a look at Archie Baird's fantastic CZ that we filmed at Westmorland's Golden Jubilee Scramble in that same year. So this particular CZ is unlike any other Czechoslovakian twin shocker that you've seen before or likely to see, because this bike here has a custom built frame, fuel tank, and also quite a lot of other trick parts that you'll never see on one of your run-of-the-mill CZ racers. But let's just begin with the bike's frame, which is one of only two bespoke chassis that were built by the multi-talented Irish frame designer and fabricator Harry Stitt, who we've already mentioned many times here on my channel when it comes to these kind of special bike builds, and both of these chassis were bent, shaped and bronze welded by Harry himself, and the finished frames are of course not painted or chromed or even nickel plated, because it'd be such a shame to hide this excellent bronze welding that holds the chassis together. So the engine here in Archie's bike is a 380 CZ 2-stroke, and this engine here was built by Norrie Patty at 3L Race Developments, who is still regarded as one of your go-to guys if you need your old Czechoslovakian CZ engine given a new lease of life. But basically this is your old Czechoslovakian smoker on steroids with some nice trick parts bolted onto it to make it run and handle better and of course develop a little more power. And you can see straight away that the barrel on this engine's been scalloped by removing every second cooling fin to try and reduce weight and some vibration as well. And a brand new alloy airbox has also been fabricated to replace the original. And on this transmission side, we've got the new upgraded shifter system that's also been fitted to the gearbox, which takes away that long throw that you used to get between the gears of these CZ engines. Now, another nice touch was to fit these wider footrests, which of course will give Archie's feet much more support, and it will make a big improvement over those skinny CZ originals. But anyhow, one of the more outstanding features on this CZ is that lovely sculpted alloy fuel tank, which will replace what probably would have been an old fiberglass one on the original 380. Now, this alloy sculpture here was all fabricated by a man called Alan Harrow, a person that I know absolutely nothing about, but he did build this fuel tank and the two alloy side panels on the bike, so he's obviously a man with a huge talent to turn out workmanship such as this. And this fuel tank is a work of art, really, in its own right. And also this bespoke seat was all custom made to fit the bike, and I think it used the original CZ base and then the foam insert and this colour coordinated seat cover was then added to finish it off. Now, we did say that two of these bikes were built, and here are those two lucky owners of these very trick machines, which is Archie Baird there on the left and John Fleming on the right. Both top riders with the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club, and you can imagine quite successful as well on these Harry Stitt Nori Patty 3L Special CZs. Nevertheless, both of these quite unique machines do have some very trick parts bolted onto them, and we've only really covered a few of them in this very short clip, although maybe during the winter period we might even get around to doing a full length feature on both of these bikes. But in this short clip, that's just a quick look around Archie Baird's bike from the Westmorland Scramble back in 2021. But anyhow, staying in the Westmorland paddock in 2021, we next came across Trevor Calderwood's 1983 500 TC 4-stroke Husqvarna. This is another exceptional thumper classic. So just like our previous CZ special, this bike here again is not an original 1983 model because it's all been tricked up to improve on that original Husky design. Now, firstly, the frame looks identical to the 1983 Husky item. It's actually a brand new reproduction frame made by BZS Racing Parts in the Netherlands, who make chassis for many of the popular twin shockers like Maiko's and some of the other brands. And Trevor said that the main reason for buying one of these BZS chassis is that it can accommodate a much bigger flat slide carburetor and airbox, and these frames are also made a lot narrower than the Husky ones, which also helps with the handling. But as we move on to this 500 TC 4-stroke motor, which is just a stock standard 83 engine with no upgrades or improvements, which Trevor said he thinks it all helps to keep the engine reliable, and of course, besides these big thumper Husky motors, do have quite a decent amount of grunt, even in their standard 1983 setup, although Trevor did tell me that he fitted a much larger than stock flat slide key-in carburettor to try and improve the power. And here on this side of the engine, we've got a couple of nice upgrades with that rear brake pedal, all machined from billet alloy to replace what probably would have been a simple steel item. And of course, the bike's original flat steel footrests have again been swapped for these much wider and grippier pegs, which will offer a lot more support and grip than those original 1983 stock items. And as you can see, these are made of very good quality materials. So moving on to the front end of our Husky, the original 83 triple clamps, or triple trees as I think some people call these parts. These have been substituted for these custom made CNC machined alloy parts, which are just a couple of the many bespoke components that Trevor sourced from Germany to build this bike. And these again have been finished off by adding some quite nice alloy bar risers as well to try and raise the height of the handlebars. Now, with regards to these front forks, you can probably by now already guess that these again are not the Husqvarna items, because these are a pair of Italian Marzocchi Magnums, which again will be a massive improvement over the Husky 83 parts. And because these are completely different from the stock items, a new alloy fork anchor clamp for that front brake had to be made up to keep the front brake and its backplate in the proper place, which again has been machined to fit these particular forks. Now, the stock Husqvarna ITC or Olin shocks that would have been here on the back have now been changed for these British-made YSS piggyback gas units, which again are excellent quality and perfect for this big thumper. And because our 500 Husky has a twin port cylinder head, it naturally also has twin header pipes as well that lead onto these two tailpipes at the rear. And the 1983 tailpipes have been substituted for these custom built alloy pipes that once again Trevor has sourced directly from Germany. Anyhow, as I said, this is not your average stock run-of-the-mill 500TC Husky thumper, but without doubt it's a belter of a four-stroke, and it's just one of the many nice twin-shock racers that Trevor has in his collection. And this one here is another bespoke, custom-made machine to suit Trevor's own particular design parameters and riding skills. So as we fast forward another few years of the Westmorland Scrambles, and this was yet another rare and interesting item that I came across in 2024, and this time this bike is a 1982 German-made Kramer EX410, which is another example of one of those bikes that you very seldom see these days. Now, on the day that I shot these short video clips, I did have a very brief conversation with the bike's owner, who told me that he'd recently just bought this bike, but he didn't know that much about Kramer's or even their background, and he wasn't exactly sure of what he'd actually bought. And although I was quite familiar with Kramer and their 1981 bikes, this model here was something that I hadn't seen before, so I thought it best to contact my old pal Keith Ree, who was a works rider for the Kramer factory in the early 1980s, and he knew this bike straight away. Now, Keith Ree, who, as I just mentioned, he rode this works Kramer in the 1980s, and although at first glance, when you look at this bike, it does look like it has a modern style leading link type monoshock suspension on the back, but in actual fact, these early 1980 Kramers did have a pair of twin shocks at the back that were tucked up very neatly underneath the seat of the bike. Now, I know it's not that easy to see it in this particular clip, which is why everybody that looked at these bikes used to think that these were monoshockers. But if we take a look at this other example here that I filmed about 10 years ago, you can get a much better look at that rear suspension system and just how it was all laid out in 1981. And as we go back to our 1982 EX410, you can see that it has a completely different rear suspension setup from the 1981 bike, which is actually the reason that I contacted Keith in the first place, and he told me that this was a 1982 model that had the improved PDS rear suspension, or progressive damping system, if you want to give it its full name. But this time you can see that those older twin shock layouts have been replaced by a single shock that was connected onto this quite elaborate linkage system that connected the swing arm onto the bottom of the shock. But this is still a rare bike, because I think later in 1982 Kramer then became known as Kramer IT, because it was then fully Italian owned and operated. But overall, these Kramers were certainly quite good bikes. They had a good strong steel box section type swing arm, and the majority of the rest of the bike was usually made up with tubular steel type tubing. But to power our Kramer, it was the tried and tested Rotax two-stroke engine that more or less powered all of the Kramer off-roaders, mainly because it was just so good at what it did. It was light and it was powerful, and of course it was as tough as an anvil as well, as long as you looked after all the internals of the motor. But I must say, this featured bike here, despite maybe one or two standard parts that are bolted onto it, is a very rare and original example, and it appears to have most of its 1982 components that were fitted to it 43 years ago. And even this original exhaust expansion chamber is ding and dent free, so I'm assuming that this bike here has not had much track action, or maybe it's been tucked away somewhere for the last 40 years or so. And as I said, these were very quick bikes with that combination of the Kramer tubular steel frame and the Rotax engine. The front forks on these German Kramers were usually Italian-made Marzoccis, because for the early 1980s, these Marzoccis were considered some of the best forks available for that time period, and they were supplied to a multitude of different off-road bike manufacturers around Europe. But in terms of our modern day motorcycle suspensions, these would probably be seen as a bit antique, although this of course was the suspension technology of its day. And here at the front end we have an old school drum and shoe type brake, which again was surprisingly good at what it did. Now, we've already established that the bike had a single rear Öhlins monoshock at the back with a remote gas and oil reservoir that was placed here on one of the down tubes of the chassis, just to try and keep everything cool when that suspension was being worked hard. And the fuel tank on our Kramer was naturally made from plastic, because more or less all off-road bikes of this period had now switched from the more expensive alloy tanks to these plastic items, which of course can be made very cheaply and in any colour that you could imagine. And this one here was slightly translucent as well, so you could see just how much fuel you had in the tank by simply looking on the outside. Anyhow, it's good to be able to get a look at one of these German Kramers again, and I've already covered the history and the background of the Kramer factory in some of my other videos, and as I said, I've covered quite a few of the 1981 models down the years, and even that Keith Ree works bike we had a brief look at, but this 1982 PDS EX410 is a super rare and exotic example. Anyhow, let's conclude our walk around the Westmorland race paddock and take a brief look at Rob Lawrence's classic CCM, another classic from the paddock at their Golden Jubilee event, which took place in 2021. And so this Golden Jubilee race weekend was to celebrate 50 years of CCM racing, and not only did we have a few CCM racing celebrities on show, we also had some of the nicest examples of Clues competition motorcycles in the country. And this Rob Lawrence 4-valver was among the many that were on show and taking part in the CCM races over that weekend. Anyhow, during the very brief conversation that I had with Robert on the day that I filmed these clips, he told me that he's just recently put this bike back together as it suffered a serious engine fire a while back, and he told me it did quite a lot of damage to the engine and many of the bike's other components as well. And this CCM celebration weekend was going to be the bike's first ever outing since it'd been put back together. And as you can see, it all looks good now and ready to go. So Robert's CCM engine, as you can no doubt gather, is the later 4-valve top end rather than the earlier 2-valve head on the much earlier 1970s models. And I'm guessing here that this engine will also have the later 4-speed gearbox as well, as opposed to the earlier 3 speeders. Nevertheless, and don't quote me here, but I think this bike will possibly be a 78 or maybe a 79 model, and as far as I know, it still has the original chassis. But the forks on Robert's Clues bike are Italian Marzoccis, which, as you know, were never used on the stock CCMs, but certainly by the end of the 1970s, Alan Clues was manufacturing and fitting his own CCM forks to these bikes. And these BSA-derived 4-stroke engines were, as you know, fantastic thanks to Alan Clues' engineering skills when he took what was basically a quite mundane 4-stroke road bike engine, and he turned it into a highly competitive off-road racing power plant. And with these tubular steel chrome-plated chassis and alloy fuel tank and all the other parts that go into creating a Clues competition machine, he was able to take on the might of the Japanese, who at the time were dominating motocross racing with their lighter and faster 2-strokes. But summing up, I think it's suffice to say that there were a fantastic collection of CCMs at this 2021 event, and I think maybe we'll even do a feature on some more of them when we cover our next walk around the Westmorland Paddock. But there you go, that's just a small sample of a few of the nice classics that we filmed over the last 5 years of the Westmorland Motor Club's superb classic scramble events. But I do hope you'll join me next time as we head back to the Telford show for yet more classic and vintage race machines.